Excellencies and colleagues, we'll start the event. We'll now start with the Adaptation Fund side event on the topic of the fund's new medium-term strategy. My name is Dr. Johanna Nalo, and I am your moderator for today. I'm a lead author of the IPCC Working Group 2 on the sixth assessment on adaptation, which lays out what we need in terms of adaptation action in the next 5 to 10 years. Coinciding with the fund's 15th year anniversary of its operations, this side event launches the fund's new 5-year medium-term strategy for 2023 to 2027, which was approved by the Adaptation Fund Board at this 39th meeting in October 2022. This event presents the new strategy's main features of promoting and scaling local adaptation action, innovation, and learning by enhancing existing funding opportunities. We are joined by the various stakeholders and partners of the fund that have played a crucial role in developing this strategy, including the Adaptation Fund Board and its Secretariat, distinguished high-level speakers from recipient and contributor governments, national implementing entities, and civil society. I would now first like to invite the Chair of the Adaptation Fund Board, Mr. Albara Tafik, to provide welcoming remarks. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, colleagues, on behalf of the Adaptation Fund Board, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to the Adaptation Fund side event at COP27 to launch the fund's new midterm strategy. The board has worked hard over the last year to develop this strategy and to reflect the fund's growing role in channeling adaptation finance to developing countries and to sell it on a path to continued success for the next 5 and 10 years. We created a task force for developing the strategy and consulted many of the fund's stakeholders, including the recipient and contributor countries, implementing entities, civil society, youth, adaptation experts, and the scientific community. The board is extremely grateful for these various inputs. The board was pleased to approve the new midterm strategy at its last 39 board meeting in Bonn, and I'm especially happy that today all of these stakeholders have come together to launch it at the COP of implementation in Egypt, which has been one of the big advocates for the fund throughout the years. Our work at the board is not done yet, as between now and the next board meeting, we will be working on implementing a plan that defines the detailed modalities, and we look forward to continuing the discussion with all of you on maximizing the fund's impact for reaching the most vulnerable communities in the developing world. On behalf of the board, I'd like to welcome you to the event. Thank you for being here and look forward to a successful event. Back to you, Ioana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next speaker was supposed to be Ambassador Nasser, the lead negotiator of Egypt's COP27 presidency, but unfortunately he's required in the official business of the presidency at this time, but he may join us later. Next, we are honored to be joined by Minister Tvinnereim, Minister of International Development from Norway, a contributor government of the fund. Minister Tvinnereim, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and let me first congratulate you on the 15th anniversary and on the adoption of a new medium-term strategy. And I'm very pleased to see that the strategy will reinforce the added value of the Adaptation Fund, especially when it comes to locally led and locally based adaptation, which really is key to increasing innovation and scaling up efficient interventions. The devastating flooding in Pakistan, the drought unfolding on the African continent as we speak, and so many other extreme weather events around the world are stark reminders of the urgency that we are in, which makes the work of the Adaptation Fund and all of us ever so much more important. In our common struggle for climate adaptation, we're faced with some severe bottlenecks. The most important is, of course, the lack of funds. Another bottleneck is that only 10% of the adaptation funding is estimated to reach the local level. To be quite honest, when I read this in my briefing, I hardly could believe it. I would like to refer to the Adaptation Fund's enhanced direct access modality as very relevant in this regard. This modality provides national entities the possibility to access finance, to strengthen local capacity, and to build on the local knowledge. And I'm very pleased to note that the fund has endorsed the principle on locally led adaptation. Inclusive processes are key to enhance adaptive capacity and to build resilience. And so is gender-responsive climate finance, as underlined in this new mid-term strategy. I would say that there is an increased awareness now of the risks of maladaptation and also lock-ins of vulnerability. The fund's continued focus on learning and knowledge exchange is a good way of avoiding such crises. We should all join hands with the fund and with each other in sharing experience, learning from each other, dare to learn from our mistakes. As I said, only 10% of the finance gets down to the local level. That is unacceptable. Climate adaptation and building climate resilience is a priority area for Norwegian development cooperation. And we put the money where our mouths are. At COP26, Norway announced that we will double our climate funding and at least triple funding towards climate change adaptation by 2026. And I truly see the Adaptation Fund as a very important partner in that respect. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Minister. We're also thankful for Norway's significant and continued support to the Adaptation Fund. And many thanks to our speakers for these high-level opening remarks. Next, I would like to request the manager of the Board Secretariat to provide us with a short overview of the new features of the new strategy. Mikko leads the Fund Secretariat located in Washington, D.C. and has been at the Secretariat for 13 years. He has guided the Fund's portfolio and operations throughout the years and can speak to what this new strategy means in the context of the evolution of the Fund. Mikko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, everyone, from my side as well for joining this side event. And thank you, Minister Tvinnereim, for those kind words and again for your support, Norway's support to the Adaptation Fund. It's my pleasure to present to you the Fund's new medium-term strategy for 2023 to 2027, as approved by the Board just 3 weeks ago, to follow the current first medium-term strategy that we've been implementing for the last 5 years. It couldn't be more timely to launch the strategy at this COP27 here in Egypt, as the Fund's mandate and mission are more relevant than ever. As well, as we are all aware, the next 5 to 10 years are decisive for achieving the Paris Agreement global climate goals and the 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals. We know from the IPCC and other recent reports that the urgency for adaptation has never been higher than it's now, and that closing adaptation gaps requires long-term planning and accelerated implementation of adaptation options, particularly in the next decade. Since its inception in 2007, the Fund has evolved into a mature institution and a key channel for adaptation finance to developing countries. Through its 15 years of operations, the fund has garnered valuable experience and expertise in funding effective adaptation action and learning and sharing as captured in the first medium-term strategy for a period of 2018 to 2022. The fund has grown further as an institution, and its resources have grown to over $1 billion with a steady upward trend in funding requests and approvals. In light of the urgent crisis of climate change and the ongoing recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, stakeholders have highlighted an even greater relevance of the fund and its medium-term strategy. The new strategy has been developed for a year through an open and inclusive stakeholder consultation process and based on the evidence and recommendations produced by the fund's evaluation function, the Technical Evaluation Reference Group, and I would like to recognize the presence of the chair of the TERG and other member of the TERG. This strategy has been designed with the aim to maximize its impact and consolidate its comparative advantage in the wider adaptation finance landscape, which is its timely support to developing countries for high-quality adaptation access. The fund is an agile and nimble institution with efficient and transparent processes that enable simplified access to resources. It has strong governance and safeguards that ensure that funding reaches the most vulnerable communities on the ground. It's a pioneer in funding direct access and enhanced direct access and in advancing gender-responsive climate finance. And it's aligned with the principles for locally led adaptation, as the Minister just mentioned as well. The fund's mission, and I'm going to read this out because it's important. The fund's mission is to serve the Paris Agreement by accelerating effective adaptation action and efficient access to finance, including through direct access, to respond to the urgent needs and priorities of developing countries. The fund does so by supporting country-driven adaptation projects and programs, innovation and learning with concrete results at the local level that can be scaled up. In line with this mission, the strategic focus areas are the three pillars of action, innovation, and learning and sharing. This follows from the first medium-term strategy. There are 6 cross-cutting areas. All of the fund's activities are designed to promote locally based or locally led action. The fund enhances access to climate finance and long-term institutional capacities. The fund empowers and benefits the most vulnerable people and communities as agents of change. It advances gender equality. It strengthens complementarity, coherence, and synergies with other adaptation funders and actors. Here, the focus on locally based and the focus on scaling up are new areas compared to the previous medium-term strategy that are not new for the fund's work, but were added at this strategic level to reflect their importance. By pursuing its mission, the fund contributes to the vision and goal that developing countries will be successfully enabled to enhance their adaptive capacity, strengthen their resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change consistent with their adaptation needs and priorities under the Paris Agreement and in the context of climate resilient and sustainable development. Under this new medium-term strategy, the fund will expand its work and increase its ambition under the 3 pillars of action, innovation and learning and sharing, and will harness synergies and linkages between these pillars. All of Adaptation Fund activities are local, and it's been supporting locally led adaptation since its launch. The fund's experience with enhanced direct access modality provides insight into how modalities that promote the devolved decision-making to local levels can enable local leadership of adaptation. A lot of learning has been generated and disseminated in this area, and the fund was involved in the developing of the principles for local-led adaptation action by the Global Commission on Adaptation. The board adopted these principles last year. Under the new medium-term strategy, it will be mainstreamed across the fund's operations. The fund will also launch an additional window for locally led and locally based action that would build on the existing modality of enhanced direct access, which will be expanded with further resources and with dedicated capacity building and resources to directly involve and empower local institutions. A second new cross-cutting theme, scaling up, the fund will incentivize scalability and replicability upstream as part of project design and implementation. It will expand the range of stakeholders that may scale up adaptation fund projects through proactive support. We're very happy that some national implementing entities that have experience with both locally led adaptation and scaling up of adaptation fund projects are with us today to share their experience, and we are very excited to launch this new era of the fund's operations with them and with all of you here in Egypt. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mikko, for an overview. That looks like a very, very impressive strategy, really further carving the fund's niche of prioritizing local level action and empowering the most vulnerable. Next, we have an impressive panel of stakeholder voices that can speak to the fund's importance for developing countries and beneficiaries. Could I ask the panelists please to come to the podium? Okay, so next we have a panel discussion and we'll hear, as said, stakeholder perspectives on the new medium-term strategy. The first theme that we will touch upon is on accelerating effective adaptation action in developing countries. I would like to call Mr. Idrissa Niang from Senegal, representing the least developed countries group, to share very important perspective of a key group of the most vulnerable developing countries, the LDCs. Mr. Niang, the floor is yours.
So, Mikko. Good afternoon, colleagues. I am representing the LDC chair, Madam Madan Jussa. He is now at the delivering the press conference for the LDC group. So I am really happy to share view from the chair and some points with regard to vulnerable countries, the less developing countries in the process, who are more vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change. So I recall our last meeting, I am a member of the fund, of the board, and we work on that strategy, and we amend a lot that strategy that can maybe allow the process of the adaptation fund to allow vulnerable community and vulnerable population to have an access direct to this fund. So, as said the ministry from Norway, 10% is going directly to the local population, and it's what we want to correct when elaborating from the Secretariat and the fund, this strategy to allow people and vulnerable and local community to access direct to this fund, go direct to them, and then make them to be more resilient with regard to the adverse effect of climate change. So Senegal was the first country who benefited of this fund, and until now, the project we already implemented in Senegal still being an example of implementation of the findings coming from the adaptation. And we want and we need the fund to accelerate the access direct of this fund, the model of the, and to simplify the process of accessing on the fund. So that is challenging for the fund to make it real, the politic and the policy of adaptation, with giving finance, The grant is not too big, maybe $20 million. But what we did in Sali, what we did in Joal, and what we did in Dufisk permit and allow population which is living in the vulnerable area to still living in this area and to have another activities different. In some other countries where we do not have adaptation projects, even in the north, some people are already displaced with regard to the sea level rise. And it's not only with regard to coastal erosion and sea level rise that we need to adapt. We need to adapt in the agriculture sector, the fishing sector. All these sectors are very vulnerable. Our economy, who is very weak and very, our economy is very weak. So I mean, this strategy that we already approved within the board will help all these countries to have a very fast access to this fund, and the fund can go directly to the vulnerable population. So, Chair, this is what I want to share. The interest of accelerating the access, the access to the fund, and to allow the fund and the financement to go directly to the population and the local community. So that is what I want to share with people here. I thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Niang, board member representing the LDCs. Next, I would like to call for Ms. Esra Christopher from Antigua and Barbuda, who is representing the Alliance of Small Island States, who represents another group of highly vulnerable developing countries. Esra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Excellencies, colleagues, and distinguished delegates. At the onset, I would like to express my gratitude in the flexibility demonstrated in allowing me to speak on behalf of Ambassador Conrad Hunt, Deputy Chair and Lead Climate Negotiator of the Alliance of Small Island States. Ambassador Hunt is unable to be here today due to conflicting schedules. AOSIS appreciates this opportunity to speak here today and to share Antigua and Barbuda's national perspective. Antigua and Barbuda is appreciative of the support it has been able to access through the Adaptation Fund. The funding provided has enabled it to advance its adaptation priorities, scale up its projects, and complement other ongoing climate change initiatives. So we welcome the Adaptation Fund Board's approval of its new medium-term strategy and its subsequent mission of accelerating adaptation, action, and enhanced access to finance. The adoption of the new 5-year strategy will further build on the fund's strategic pillars of action, innovation, learning, and sharing. Further, the new strategy focuses on enabling locally led and locally based adaptation and scaling up results. It will promote increased ambition to help meet the adaptation needs of vulnerable countries and communities, furthering the impact achieved over the last 5 years and optimizing the fund's value and impact. There is a necessity to ensure the medium-term strategy and resource mobilization strategy maintain alignment. On the Adaptation Fund's enhanced direct access, Antigua and Barbuda has been accredited to the Adaptation Fund since 2015 as a national implementing entity. We were reaccredited in 2020. In this capacity, Antigua and Barbuda has been able to access financing, manage, monitor, and report on climate adaptation and resilience projects. We have also been able to leverage some of the funds from the Adaptation Fund to also scale up a project under GCF. So we definitely welcome our partnership with the Adaptation Fund, and we look forward to further enhanced direct access opportunities. We are at this time planning to develop a enhanced direct access project with the Adaptation Fund and a possible EDA project with GCF. We have an existing EDA project with GCF that also has components from the AF project that was introduced in a particular vulnerable community where we offer revolving loans. We also offer grants to community-based organizations to retrofit their facilities to serve as shelters. As many of you know, Antigua and Barbuda is a small island developing state which is impacted by, particularly by hurricanes, droughts, and sea level rise. So this low interest loans as well as concessional grants have been very helpful to communities as well as households and businesses to regain their level of, to build their adaptive capacity as well as build resilience. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Christopher. Up next, I'd like to move to one of the cross-cutting themes of the strategy, which is enhancing access to climate finance and long-term institutional capacity. Our speaker is Ms. Claudia Gottfried, the National Implementing Entity from Peru, from the Peruvian Trust Fund for National Parks and Protected Areas, and chair of the Community of Practice for Direct Access Entities. We know that the Adaptation Fund has pioneered and is still a leader for direct access. And direct access has been instrumental for building countries' capacities for accessing climate finance. Okay. And the question, Claudia, for you is that as the chair of the CPDAE, kindly share with us how the fund going forward can further enhance access and institutional capacity, and what is the role of the CPDAE in this regard? Thank you.
It's green. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to be in this important event for the Adaptation Fund, also for our national implementing entities. My name is Claudia Godfrey, and I am chair of the Community of Practice of Direct Access Entities. This is a country-driven initiative from the NIS and the Direct Access Entities accredited by the Green Climate Fund. We are a global network that seeks to strengthen their capacities through sharing and learning, and that's why we congratulate that one of the most important pillars in this strategy is learning and sharing. This, as you may see, are the pictures of our latest annual meeting. Is the first one that we held last week in Cairo. We were 23 members, NIEs and DAEs, discussing and sharing our common bottlenecks, frustrations, problems, limitations, to find the best way to solve our problems together, building trust among each other, to support us and find the best and suitable solutions. Since always, the Adaptation Fund has been a partner supporting us, not just with technical assistance, but also encouraging us to continue our endeavor. We started this journey since 2015 during the annual seminars of the Adaptation Fund, and there we started identifying the importance of share our common concerns and problems. So accreditation made us NIEs better organizations, and as the ministry mentioned, we are the best channel for climate finance. We can accelerate solutions, innovation, access to finance, synergies, enhancing the adaptive capacity. to reduce vulnerability and increase resilience of the ones who need it in the field and in the ground. So this is our identity. We decided this identity together last week, and we are the community of practice of direct access entities. And it's my honor to present our first group. We are trying to gather more NIEs and DIEs for building this trust, and we thank the Adaptation Fund again for all their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Next, we'll move to the two new cross-cutting themes, as mentioned by Mikko, which are promoting and scaling locally led adaptation. And we are happy to be joined by two NIEs that have experience with enhanced direct access projects, who can share with us how this process have actually enabled them to implement adaptation that is locally led and therefore effective and sustainable, and what that means going forward for scaling up these projects. So next we have a virtual participant, Ms. Mandy Barnett, who's South African National Biodiversity Institute at SANBI, and National Implementing Entity. Mandy, thank you for joining from South Africa, and the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to this meeting. It's an absolute honor to represent the NIEs, and it's lovely to see so many familiar faces. And I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person. I'd like to start off by congratulating the fund on its 15th anniversary and, of course, its new strategy. SANBI became South Africa's NIE to the Adaptation Fund in 2011, and it's also a direct access climate fund. We partnered with the Adaptation Fund to develop and deliver the very first enhanced direct access project, which was approved all the way back in 2014. This was a project that supported locally led adaptation through a small grant facility project in 2 vulnerable regions in South Africa. Grants were provided to local organizations to support climate change adaptation responses in frontline communities. And these organizations to climate change, science and local and indigenous knowledge, and for us to learn a whole lot of lessons that are now helping us to scale the work. I'd like to just comment that the Adaptation Fund has been an incredible partner for SANBI. It's helped us to innovate, supporting enhanced direct access before it was called enhanced direct access, supporting locally led adaptation before it was called locally led adaptation. It's been receptive to our ideas and our suggestions. It's been forgiving of our mistakes and of our late reporting. It's been enabling of our institutional strengthening processes, and it's been transformative, including in the way that it has supported direct access, enhanced direct access, and locally led adaptation, and in the way that it has enabled cross-institutional learning for these. And finally, of course, it's supported SANBI to build our capacity to become accredited with the Green Climate Fund, with whom we are currently engaging around a range of new project proposals, 2 of which scale up our Adaptation Fund investments and 1 in EDA. So we're very pleased to see the focus of the Adaptation Fund's new medium-term strategy. We wish the Adaptation Fund all the best in its implementation and look forward to working with the Adaptation Fund in this regard. Thank you, Adaptation Fund, for all you do in support of direct access, enhanced direct access, and locally led adaptation.
All right, thank you, Mandy. Apologies for some of the virtual connection difficulties. Next, we'll move to Ms. Tamara Greenstones, Alefaya, from the Micronesia Conservation Trust, from National Implementing Entity. So we will hear an example of locally led action in the Pacific Seas from the Federal States of Micronesia, the Micronesian Conservation Trust. Tamara, the floor is yours.
Put my computer on top of that one?
Of course.
Since everyone came up.
Yes, sorry.
Or do you want me to go sit down?
No, this is excellent because then you can click through, and I'm just trying to open it though. Here we are.
can just start.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tamara Alafaya with the Micronesia Conservation Trust. I've been very lucky to be adopted into the region of Micronesia for the last 20 years, although I am originally from Canada, and I'm very honored to be here today. I just wanted to share a little bit. I was asked to share a little bit about MCT and our work. This is Micronesia. Is not a place that most people recognize or know where it is. If you think about Hawaii and then you look southwest about 3,500 miles, you'll find Micronesia, which is a very large ocean space with very small islands. The Micronesia Conservation Trust is an accredited entity to the Adaptation Fund, and we're also a direct access entity to the Green Climate Fund. We were accredited in 2017. We followed in the footsteps of Mandy and Sanby in South Africa to be one of the first to receive EDA funding, enhanced access funding, from the Adaptation Fund. And we've been supporting, like Mandy shared, the EDA and locally led adaptation for years and years, since about 2002, long before they were labeled as such. We also are very grateful because of our partnership with the Adaptation Fund. We were mainstreamed or streamlined into our GCF accreditation, and we currently have an EDA concept that was approved, and we're just about to submit to the board. I just want to show, I don't think I need to show this necessarily in a room like this, but those are 4 photos that I took myself. That is for impacts of the effects of climate change in the Federated States of Micronesia. And I think what's important is that we recognize, and I think all of us do here, but thanks to the Adaptation Fund and as being one of the first funds to really recognize that locally led adaptation is important because the impacts are local and we need to trust local communities to know what's best for them. So I'd like to thank the Adaptation Fund and congratulate the Adaptation Fund, but really thank them for always supporting locally led adaptation, for creating the EDA window before other funds did, and for prioritizing locally led adaptation as a priority in your midterm strategy. Just really quickly, again, I'm not sure if I need to share all of this with the people in the room, so forgive me if it's redundant, but just a couple of insights as to why the enhanced direct access process that provides funding to support locally led adaptation is important. In Micronesia, we find that it's important because it's in response to community planning and it's not dictated by a donor. So with Adaptation Fund under the EDA window, when you apply for that, you receive funding based on an indicative list perhaps of projects you might fund, but it's not defined. Your projects are not defined. You're given the trust to go through a process with your communities to define what they need and what is best for their implementation of, or for their adaptation. Traditional and local leadership values are locally led initiatives and they're closer to the problems, so communities are closer to their own problems, and that means that you have more likely a more sustainable project. Local community empowerment to implement projects and in turn experience higher levels of social cohesion and capacity. You don't have outside goals or outside priorities. You have communities who've gone through a process together to decide what they need, and usually we find that leads to more cohesion and less, and it's easier to implement projects. And that means that the project support is also greater. Funds mostly remain in the communities. I think this is really important because a lot of the time the external funding comes in and it has many, many layers. In this case, every dollar stays in the community, even the funding, the personnel, the wages, the consultants that we hire typically are local consultants. So the funding, it helps with livelihoods in communities. Preserves traditional values and pride in local culture. I think that's a given. And finally, it's a capacity building at the local level. So capacity building is a long-term game, and locally led adaptation allows us to get funding and continuously sustain it through different projects, but with the same goal. And just 2 thoughts on scaling up, which are also priorities under this midterm strategy. For us at Micronesia Conservation Trust, we find that we give out these small grants, we on-grant, and we find that oftentimes our communities and local governments, it's their first grant. once they have funding from us, we take the risk to the fund. We're the ones who have to meet the obligations of the Adaptation Fund and our accreditation. We take that risk, we support them through the process, and then they're able to acquire more funding from other grants. They can say that they received funds through MCT and the Adaptation Fund. It's a big deal for them. And finally, having EDA projects, it's similar. It leads to more sustained funding, more permanent funding. There's just more trust and more they've increased their due diligence. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tamara. The last theme on the panel is on benefiting and empowering the most vulnerable people and communities as agents of change and advancing gender equality. So these are also the two cross-cutting themes. They have been in the first strategy and have been further elevated in the new strategy. Vulnerable people and communities are really now put to center as so-called agents of change, recognizing their important role for effective adaptation, which includes the aspect of gender equality. So our next speaker is an expert on this theme of agents of change and has been really actively engaged in the strategy development process as well. Mr. Hawose Hontondi, representing the Adaptation Fund Civil Society Network from Benin. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to invite us, and I'm happy to take the floor in the behalf of the Adaptation Fund NGO network. These network have around him 200 civil society organizations around the world, and our focus is to make a watchdog activities to see how all those projects supported by the fund is really going to the communities. And we are very happy to say that we appreciate the consultative process that was implemented for this medium-term strategy with the Adaptation Fund. For us as civil society, we are very happy because usually all those processes are not very involved with the civil society, but the Adaptation Fund gives a good example in this term. The second point we have to point out here is as civil society organization, we think that it's very, very important to strengthen and to encourage all those projects have a real impact at the local level. In our activities inside commenting project, we remark that a lot of projects have a lot of activities, but not benefit in the long term to the community. So that is our job every time to comment and point out all those important points. For the Adaptation Fund NGO network, we hope that the direct access is the most important thing for the civil communities. That is why, since 2014, as networks, we make a strong advocacy to our governments in West Africa, in Central Africa, to encourage the direct access. That is why the networks works first in 4 countries: Senegal, Benin, South Africa, and Rwanda, where we have the first national implementation entities. So we are supporting this, and that is why we make a lot of input to the medium-term strategy. We are sure that all those countries will be improved and going to the direct access. We would like also to recommend that all the focal points in our countries must see their capacity built for this midterm strategy. And the designing authority, they are doing a lot, but it's interesting to notice that in some countries, the designing authority became one person. But in reality, the designing authority is an authority. So many people have to be involved of the project and sending decisions. That is our fight at the country level. That is why we support really, this midterm strategy. And we hope that this midterm strategy will bring a lot of projects in our countries where our communities are dying because of the climate change. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hantoni. And thank you to all the panelists for this rich presentation and inputs. Being in the IPCC, we often assess the scientific literature, and in the latest assessment, there is an increasing understanding that we also really need to capture these lessons from implementation and from praxis. And I think it's such a crucial opportunity to hear how the projects are actually making a massive difference on the ground. The good news is that we are actually ahead of time, and all the speakers kept to time as well. So we have lots of times for Q&A. So we do have roving mics, I understand. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and introduce yourself. Okay, while we're waiting for the hands to go up, so I might ask the question, question up here. So we have heard that what the fund has done and what it plans to do during the next 5-year period. And maybe I can ask these questions to both Mr. Chair and possibly also Mikko. How the fund sees its role among other actors in climate architecture during that time.
Thank you very much, Ioana, for the question, and thanks to the panelists for the excellent presentations. This was very useful and insightful to us, even as people who are sitting at the board of the Adaptation Fund. We definitely see the Adaptation Fund being among the most important actors when it comes to climate finance. As we saw, the interest is growing more than ever before in the Adaptation Fund. We have adopted a midterm strategy. We have discussed also resource mobilization strategy, among other policies that would definitely help the fund enhance its roles to be among the most important actors in the world of climate finance. And also, as you know, the fund witnessed recently very important milestones and important decisions, including doubling the country cap on when it comes to projects. I think that will also allow countries to benefit even more from the resources in the Adaptation Fund. We also recently finalized the policy for the fund and revisited also some of the rules and procedures to have the fund serve the Paris Agreement, which will also anchor the fund being one of the most important funds in climate change. I definitely see the Adaptation Fund also advancing even more in the future, and there was, I can share with you from being in multiple negotiation rooms, there were multiple discussions on how can we have the Adaptation Fund eventually become also on par with larger funds in climate change, including the Green Climate Fund. So I believe that, the success examples of the Adaptation Fund and the amount of projects that have been conducted and delivered by the fund are a testimony of how the fund is doing fantastic work, benefiting a huge amount of people around the world. We're lucky also at the Adaptation Fund to have a great team in the Secretariat who have been really, despite the small size, doing a huge impact in different parts of the developing world. So for that, I'm very hopeful, optimistic for the future of the fund, and definitely see the fund becoming one of the top funds when it comes to climate change. Back to you, Ioana.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mikko?
Thank you, and I fully agree with what the chair has just mentioned. Well, I would say that the Adaptation Fund has come a long way in its 15 years of existence. When the fund started, there were very few actors that were funding adaptation or that were even implementing adaptation. and there was very little experience of what adaptation looks like and how it can be best done. Now, 15 years later, the need for adaptation has grown tremendously. We've seen it in the IPCC reports, and we've seen it in the different reports that assess the available funding that's available for climate adaptation and how it's increasing. And we see that the gap between the available funding and the needs is growing. That means that we need to use every dollar as efficiently as we can to meet the needs of the countries. What this means practically for a fund like the Adaptation Fund is that, we are a fund that essentially works in our main mission, which is funding concrete adaptation projects, and we should continue doing that. If it's not broken, we shouldn't try and fix it. But at the same time, as we have this benefit of experience of 15 years and quite a sizable base of knowledge that we have accumulated along the way, it's our duty to make that available for all the other actors in the climate landscape, and that's what we are trying to do through our knowledge management program and otherwise. So that's an important part of what we need to do. Finally, I'd also really like to highlight the need for innovation, and that comes back also to the question of finance. If we only keep on doing things like we've done them for the last 15 years, the available funds are not going to be enough. So we need to find new ways, new solutions that help us be more efficient in producing climate adaptation solutions, and the innovation work that we are doing is helping us do that, and we are also doing that in partnership with other institutions that have more experience on innovation as a theme, and we are combining that with our expertise on adaptation. Finally, I'd like to mention that since the number of actors in the climate space has really multiplied, you could almost count them with the hands or fingers of a couple hands several years ago. Now there are dozens or hundreds of organizations working in adaptation, which is a great thing, but we need to also increasingly work in partnerships, because we can't do everything by ourselves, and the experience of our coherence and complementarity with, for example, with the Green Climate Fund and other actors is an example of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mikko. So any burning questions in the audience? Yes? Could you please introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anju Sharma from Nepal. I'm here as a civil society organization. So we have been into adaptation since a very long time, but what I see is missing is the applied research, because local knowledge are important, but they are not always enough. So this fund has a space for applied researchers or not? I'd like to know on that.
Sorry, we had we had a bit issues hearing the last part of the question. Would you mind repeating it?
So I'd like to know if you have the space for applied research on local adaptations.
Who would like to answer national implementation? Yep.
Hi, thank you. Under our AF project, we have a $10 million AF project. We do have a component that focuses on waterway management. So this particular component focuses on improving waterway management in a particular vulnerable community that is flood prone. So what we did was build in the project to have certain studies conducted on how we can manage the waterway and improve our drainage works in that area. So that would then feed into the implementation of the project, and we also use the baseline information from that study to feed into other areas that we want to tackle.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yep.
Thank you very much. First of all, my big congratulations to all of you that adopting new medium-term strategy. My name is Dastan. I'm coming from Kyrgyzstan, it's Central Asia. I'm wondering, I didn't see anyone from our region. That's fine. Of course, by myself, I will learn about Adaptation Fund in detail later on. But still, if you have any information, which kind of opportunities for our region we have through this medium-term strategy, and which kind of organization are currently already, accredited in Adaptation Fund, and which kind of projects are implemented now? Because to be honest, recently we heard a lot about GCF funds, GCF project, rather than adaptation funds. That's why if you have any sufficient information, please provide us. And by myself, I will learn about adaptation fund in detail later on. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We work and we appreciate our work with Central Asian countries because of the very specific vulnerabilities that the countries have in Central Asia. Now I have to confess I don't remember off the top of my head whether we are funding a project in Kyrgyzstan at the moment, but I should know that, but sorry. Yeah. But we have a regional project addressing glacier lake outburst floods for 4 Central Asian countries, and I believe Kyrgyzstan is one of the countries participating in that project. We have some single country projects in Central Asia, for example in enhanced ecosystem-based adaptation. But we can look the more specific information for you. There is currently no accredited national implementing entity in Central Asia. We would be very keen to have one. And there's also no regional agency accredited for that region. So currently the organizations that are available are the multilateral implementing entities, if I'm not mistaken. But we would very much welcome the countries, Kyrgyzstan and its neighboring countries, in applying accreditation for national agency. I'd be happy to help. Thank you.
All right, thank you. There's a new question.
Thank you very much for the presentation on the strategy. I'm from Uganda. We are also part of the team that is benefiting from Adaptation Fund. I'm wondering, under this new strategy, whether you have a possibility of cross-running across the countries. I know we have direct access and the countries accessing the funds, but I know there are a number of innovations across the various countries. How can we get countries to learn from each other, and how can, under this strategy, countries actually achieve that? So that we don't just get innovations ending at the country, but we get a number of countries learning from each other for purposes of scaling up the various innovations. Thank you.
Okay, excellent question. Who would like to take that?
Yes, thank you very much for your question, and I think that's an absolutely important part to, and it's definitely well addressed within the communication that we do at the Adaptation Fund. There are also multiple, I believe, workshops, regional workshops, and also many virtual trainings and webinars that are conducted to highlight to countries what the Adaptation Fund is doing, what are the opportunities within the fund. We have also discussed that at the previous board meeting, and we want to also increase and enhance the work that we do in that regard.
Also to add, the community of practice, Uganda is, DAE is part of the community of practice, so we aim to share and learn so the countries could take advantage of the learning of the DAEs. So This is very important, and maybe we can have a meeting so we can explain you what are we doing. Next year we are going to build a platform, we are going to develop a roster of experts, and also we are going to develop pipeline of projects for most of our members.
All right, thank you. Any more questions from the audience about projects, innovation, learning? There we go, thank you. If we can pass the mic to the back, please.
Sorry, it's always the furthest away. I'm Clara Gallagher from IIED. I suppose this one's a bit reflective, but now that you're kind of going into a new strategy period, you can reflect on what's come before. What would you say the biggest departure from a previous position has come through to the fund's current day place? Thanks.
All right, so the question, what has been the biggest departure? What has really changed with this new strategy?
Thank you. That's a very good question. When the Adaptation Fund Board considered the development of the new medium-term strategy, it considered three options. One, keep doing exactly the same as we did before. Two, improve some things but not drastic changes. And three, make really big changes. And the board chose the second option, so there are no drastic changes. So because the previous medium-term strategy was considered to have served the fund quite well, so it helps us focus on the role that we have been playing. The two new areas where we add emphasis, which are not new areas, but we lift it to the level of cross-cutting areas, are the ones that I mentioned on locally led adaptation and scaling up. So we are probably going to focus a little bit more on those compared to the last 5-year period, but again, they are not completely new. I guess what is the big underlying current in all of what we are doing is the fact that we need to scale up the scale of funding, even in the Adaptation Fund. Last year in Glasgow, we were very lucky to receive a threefold amount of pledges for support for the fund compared to our target and compared to the previous years. And that also shows, in line with the Glasgow Climate Pact, that calls for developed countries to double the adaptation funding by 2025. So we have the job cut for ourselves, that we need to accelerate and scale up the funding also ourselves, and we are responding to that call. But in terms of the content itself, there isn't a huge change. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, no. So I've got one more question. So we'd actually like to still go back to the national implementation and tie this in here. So now that the strategy is out, what are your expectations for the next 5 years?
Well, talking about the community of practice, we would like to recognize the support of the Secretariat and in all the matters that we address, accreditation, readiness, EDA, pre-implementation, gender safeguards, communications, and as Miko mentioned before, they are a mature organization that could be an example for other organizations because they do things in an excellent way and keeping simple the processes. So maybe sharing with other funds how they do the things and continue building this excellent relationship between NIEs and the fund, because I think this close dialogue supports us a lot building our capacities. Thank you.
Thank you. Ditto for us. I also just want to acknowledge, I think that our relationship with the Adaptation Fund and the support offered to NIEs has been substantial. And things could have changed with the new strategy, and instead looks like the priorities are even more focused on local needs. So I would say that our expectations are that things either stay as close and as supported or even increase. And that also goes, the Adaptation Fund has a very specific enhanced direct access window for us to access, which is outside of the country allocations. And I think that MCT is looking forward to applying for that. But I also think that's really another thing to bring up that's important, that they're really practicing what they're preaching. Thank you.
Thank you. We are very happy to see the new strategy and that the fact that it embraces more locally led adaptation actions. This is definitely going to be a key priority for Antigua and Barbuda. And as an NIE, we do plan to scale up our revolving loan component under our adaptation project. We have seen some successes in this regard. These low interest loans are helping particularly female-headed households who wouldn't typically have an opportunity to borrow loans from traditional institutions to make their homes more resilient. And we do see that this has been one of the key successes under this particular project. So we do have intention of possibly down the road applying for the EDA facility to upscale that particular component nationally and particularly target very vulnerable communities across Antigua and Barbuda. We do see there are other challenges that we want to take on in terms of providing on-granting support. We see that our community-based organizations need further assistance in writing grant proposals as well as in designing frameworks that are gender responsive and monitoring and reporting on environmental and social safeguards. So as an NIE, we plan to do further work with our community-based organizations in that regard.
All right, thank you for those excellent answers. Nico.
Thank you. If I may grab the floor, because my very competent team has reminded me about the Kyrgyzstan project, and I would like to provide the actual information. So there is one single country project that was approved earlier this year, so it's fairly new, and that's why I'm not very familiar with it yet. It's called the Regional Resilience Pastoral Communities Project, so it's dealing with the pastoral communities, and we can provide you more information about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mika. If there are no further questions, I would like to thank for all the speakers and panels for being part of the launch of this new medium-term strategy and for the support of the fund. You will all play key roles in helping to implement the new strategy and further enhancing the fund's impact for climate vulnerable communities by channeling resources to the local level. Thank you.